Hey YNR fans! Waving hand, welcome to YNR Trends, your go-to spot for the juiciest Young and the Restless updates, shocking spoilers, and all the drama you can't stop talking about. From surprise returns to scandalous twists, we break it all down for you, every day. So grab your coffee, hit that subscribe button, and let's dive right into Genoa City's hottest gossip. Daniel never saw it coming. For weeks, he thought he had finally regained some control over his life. After the heartbreaks, the lies, and the mistakes of the past, he had convinced himself that this time things were going to be different. He had a job that gave him purpose, he was rebuilding a fragile connection with his family, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he wasn't drowning. But everything began to unravel the moment Mariah decided she couldn't trust him. At first, her suspicions seemed harmless, just casual comments, side glances, little tests here and there. Daniel thought nothing of it, brushing it off as paranoia or maybe even Mariah just being protective of her circle. But underneath, Mariah was setting a stage that Daniel didn't even realize he had walked onto, and once he stepped fully inside her trap, there would be no easy way out. The tension between them had been building slowly, almost invisibly. Mariah had always been wary of Daniel, not because she hated him, but because she saw something unstable in his eyes, a desperation that reminded her too much of her own dark past. She knew what desperate people were capable of. She had lived it, she had survived it, and she had seen firsthand the destruction it could cause to anyone in their path. So when Daniel began showing signs of cracking under pressure, Mariah decided she had to intervene. But in her mind, intervention wasn't about talking things out or gently steering him toward help. No, Mariah believed Daniel needed to be exposed, to be forced into a corner so he couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. Daniel, oblivious to the quiet storm forming around him, kept walking right into the web. Mariah started small. She invited him into conversations that felt casual but were laced with traps. She asked about his late nights, his excuses for being away, the phone calls he silenced when people were around. Each question was carefully phrased, designed to push him a little further into revealing something he didn't want to say. Daniel grew defensive, but Mariah's calm and steady demeanor made him feel like he was overreacting. The truth was, Daniel had secrets, deep ones, that he couldn't afford anyone to know. And Mariah, sharp as ever, sensed it. The night everything shifted started like any other. Daniel was at society, nursing a drink, lost in his own thoughts. He had been slipping lately, falling into old patterns of self-doubt and reckless decisions. He told himself he was fine, but the truth was written all over his face. Mariah saw it too, and instead of walking away, she slid into the seat across from him. Her smile was disarming, but her eyes were calculating. Daniel tried to shake off the unease, but something about her presence made his skin crawl. She asked him how he was doing, and for a moment he considered giving her a rehearsed, shallow answer. But before he could, she leaned in and whispered words that froze him in place. "I know what you've been hiding." Daniel's heart stopped. He felt exposed, like every wall he had built around himself had just been kicked down. He stammered, tried to laugh it off, but Mariah didn't blink. She let the silence hang between them, suffocating, until Daniel finally muttered, "You don't know what you're talking about." But even as he said it, he knew the damage was done. Mariah had gotten exactly what she wanted, confirmation that there was something worth digging into. From that night on, Daniel's paranoia grew. Everywhere he went, he felt like Mariah's eyes were on him, watching, waiting for him to slip. He tried to avoid her, but Genoa City was too small, and their lives were too intertwined. Every corner he turned, she was there, ready with another pointed question or sly comment. He began to unravel under the weight of it, his temper flaring, his nerves fraying. Mariah wasn't just probing, she was pushing him toward a breaking point, and Daniel was too blinded by fear to see it. The true danger came when Mariah escalated her plan. She lured Daniel into a situation he couldn't easily escape. It started with a message, seemingly innocent: "Meet me at the Abbott cabin. We need to talk. Alone." Daniel hesitated, but something inside him, maybe pride or maybe desperation, pushed him to go. He convinced himself it was better to face her head-on than to keep living in fear of what she knew. So he drove out there, the whole way telling himself he was in control. But control was the one thing he no longer had. When he arrived, the cabin was dark except for a single lamp glowing in the corner. Mariah was waiting, calm as ever, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Daniel felt the weight of the silence pressing down on him as he stepped inside. He asked what this was about, but Mariah didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked slowly toward him, her voice low and steady when she finally spoke. "I know what you've done, Daniel. And I can't let you keep hurting people." His stomach dropped. Every instinct told him to run, but his feet were rooted to the floor. He tried to deny it, to twist her words, but Mariah didn't back down. She began laying out the pieces of his life she had been watching, each one sharper than the last. His late nights. His erratic behavior. The people he had been meeting with. The money that had mysteriously vanished. Every detail was like a knife, and with each one, Daniel felt more cornered. And then Mariah revealed the final blow. She had proof. Daniel's chest tightened as she pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. He lunged forward, panic taking over, but she pulled back, her eyes blazing. "If you so much as touch me, Daniel, everything I know goes public. Everyone will see who you really are." Daniel's world crumbled. The walls were closing in, and he realized too late that he had walked straight into the trap Mariah had been building for weeks. His breath came in shallow gasps as he backed away, his mind racing with fear and fury. He knew his life was hanging by a thread, not because Mariah wanted to hurt him physically, but because if she followed through, he would lose everything: his family, his job, his future. In that moment, Daniel's life felt as though it were in danger, not from violence, but from total destruction. And the terrifying part was, he couldn't see a way out. The intricate tapestry of Genoa City is woven with threads of ambition, passion, and vengeance, a place where the past is never truly buried and where old wounds can be reopened with a single, calculated whisper. Within this volatile landscape, the collision of Daniel Romalotti and Mariah Copeland represents a particularly potent and dangerous convergence of personal history, professional ambition, and raw, unadulterated emotional need. The scenario in which Daniel falls into a trap meticulously laid by Mariah, resulting in his life being placed in imminent peril, is not a sudden twist of fate but rather the inevitable culmination of a complex psychological and narrative chain of events. This is a slow-burning fuse lit by shared trauma, manipulated by a master of perception, and destined to explode with devastating consequences. To understand the gravity of Daniel's fall, one must first appreciate the architect of his potential demise. Mariah Copeland is a character whose identity has been forged in the fires of profound existential crisis. From her origins as a lookalike brought in to torment Cassie's memory to her own struggles with belonging and self-worth, Mariah's entire existence in Genoa City has, to some extent, been defined by her relationship to others and her place in the shadows of more established figures. Her bond with Sharon Collins, herself a figure deeply acquainted with trauma and manipulation, is one of the cornerstones of her life. This relationship is less a simple friendship and more a symbiotic survival mechanism. They are each other's anchors in a chaotic world. When Daniel re-entered the picture, forming a deep and meaningful connection with Lily Winters and establishing a new family unit that included his daughter Lucy, it created an unspoken but palpable shift in dynamics. From Mariah's perspective, Daniel's presence represents a threat, a potential disruption to the fragile ecosystem of support and understanding she has built with Sharon. His stability, his attempts at a normal family life, and his deepening ties to the Chancellor Winters empire stand in stark contrast to the often chaotic, trauma-bonded world Mariah inhabits. This perceived threat is not necessarily a conscious, malicious thought in Mariah's mind, but rather a deep-seated, instinctual fear of abandonment and irrelevance that has been her constant companion for years. Daniel Romalotti, on the other hand, is a man perpetually seeking solid ground. His life has been a series of ups and downs, from his rock star aspirations to his various business ventures and his complicated romantic entanglements. His greatest and most consistent role has been that of a father, first to Lucy and now to his new child with Lily. This desire for a stable, loving family environment is his driving force, his North Star. However, Daniel possesses a fundamental vulnerability, a trusting nature and a tendency to see the best in people, often blinding him to darker motivations. He views the world through a lens of reconciliation and moving forward, a perspective that can be dangerously naive when confronted with someone operating from a place of unresolved pain and perceived threat. His relationship with Mariah has historically been complex, fraught with a shared history that involves Heather Stevens and the emotional fallout from those connections. He considers the past largely settled, a closed chapter. This assumption is his critical blind spot, the chink in his armor through which Mariah's trap will be sprung. The trap itself is unlikely to be a physical snare or a blatantly criminal setup. Mariah's weapon of choice is not a gun or a poison, it is information, emotion, and perception. She is a master communicator, a skilled manipulator of narrative honed by her years in media and her innate understanding of human psychology. Her trap for Daniel would be a psychological labyrinth, designed to exploit his goodness, his paternal instincts, and his desire to help those in need. It would begin subtly, perhaps with Mariah expressing concern for Lucy or for Daniel's new family. She might fabricate a crisis, a perceived threat to Lucy's well-being that only Daniel, with his specific history and connection, can solve. Alternatively, she might stage a situation where she appears to be in dire emotional distress, playing on Daniel's innate chivalry and concern for his friends. She knows he would not hesitate to rush to her aid, especially if she cleverly implicates Sharon's well-being in the mix, knowing his enduring care for his ex-wife. The genius of Mariah's trap lies in its verisimilitude. It would feel entirely real and urgent because she would believe parts of it herself. Her own fears and anxieties would fuel the performance, making it impossible for Daniel to detect the deception. She might lead him to an isolated location under the pretense of helping someone else, a distressed Sharon, a missing Lucy, a confidential source with critical information. The location would be key, remote, symbolic of past traumas, perhaps a place associated with Cassie or with other pivotal moments in their shared history. This would heighten the emotional stakes and cloud Daniel's judgment further, immersing him in a narrative that feels frighteningly familiar. The moment of the fall is not when Daniel arrives at the location, but when he fully commits to the false reality Mariah has constructed. It is the moment he realizes, too late, that the crisis was an illusion, that the person he came to help is the architect of his peril. The look of genuine concern on his face would shift to one of dawning horror and betrayal as Mariah's demeanor changes, as the mask of vulnerability slips away to reveal the calculated intent beneath. The danger to Daniel's life would then manifest. It may not be Mariah's direct hand that threatens him, but a consequence of the situation she engineered. The isolated location could pose a physical threat, a decaying structure he falls from, a remote area where he is exposed to the elements without help. Perhaps her scheme inadvertently unleashes a third, more volatile party, someone from their past whose rage is triggered by the scenario Mariah concocted. In a twist of tragic irony, Daniel's life is endangered not because Mariah necessarily wants him dead, but because her need to control the narrative, to reassert her primacy in her chosen family, spirals catastrophically out of her own control. She becomes a prisoner of her own plot, watching in terror as the dominoes fall in a way she did not fully anticipate, placing the man she likely still considers a friend in mortal jeopardy. The profound danger of this situation extends far beyond the immediate physical threat. It represents the utter shattering of trust within their entire social circle. For Sharon, discovering that her closest confidant engineered a scenario that led to the potential death of her ex-husband and the father of her friend's child would be an unforgivable betrayal, a tear in the very fabric of her reality. For Lily, the revelation that Daniel's innate goodness was so cruelly exploited would ignite a fury aimed not just at Mariah, but at the entire web of history that enabled such an event to occur. It would force her to question everyone's motives, creating a fortress around her family that may never again be lowered. For Daniel, survival would come at a terrible cost. The betrayal would fundamentally alter his worldview, replacing his trusting nature with a deep and permanent cynicism. The man who sought a peaceful family life would be haunted by the fact that the greatest danger came not from a business rival or a stranger, but from within his own extended circle, from a shared history he believed was resolved. Furthermore, the aftermath would force a painful introspection upon Mariah herself. Witnessing the near destruction she caused, seeing the raw pain on the faces of Sharon, Lily, and a terrified Lucy, could be the catalyst for a complete psychological breakdown. Her actions, born from a desperate need to feel secure and important, would achieve the exact opposite, alienating her from everyone she holds dear and confirming her deepest fears of being monstrous and unlovable. The trap she set for Daniel ultimately becomes a trap for her own soul, condemning her to an isolation of her own making. The moral ambiguity is what gives this storyline its powerful resonance. Mariah is not a classic villain, she is a profoundly damaged individual whose coping mechanisms curdle into something toxic and dangerous. The audience is forced to wrestle with a complex cocktail of emotions, condemnation for her actions warring with a painful understanding of their root cause. In the end, the narrative of Daniel falling into Mariah's trap is a classic Greek tragedy played out on a modern stage. It is a cautionary tale about the poison of unresolved trauma and the catastrophic consequences of allowing fear to dictate one's actions. Daniel, the tragic hero, is brought low not by a hamartia of pride or ambition, but by his very virtue, his compassion and his willingness to help. Mariah, the antagonist, is a figure of pathos, whose desperate attempt to control her world results in its utter demolition. The resulting danger is more than just a threat to one man's life, it is a threat to the emotional foundations of an entire community. It exposes the fragile lines between love and obsession, between protection and possession, and between seeking help and crafting a weapon from one's own pain. The fallout would ripple through Genoa City for years, a stark reminder that in a world built on past connections, some traps are not made of steel and wire, but of memory and fear, and they are the most dangerous ones of all.